Hi, thanks everybody for joining today. And on this day, we're going to do a customer webinar talking to you about how you might migrate from the cloud to Office 365 and talk about the benefits that you might achieve how on doing that, and also how you might migrate all your existing content across to the Office 365 environment. So first of all, a little bit of housekeeping, just to say that for assistance during the call today, please email info@flowforma.com. Also, just to say your lines are muted, so if you have any questions at all during the webinar, please type your questions into the chat box, and there'll be some time for Q&A at the end. After the webinar, if you'd like a more in-depth demo to try out some new features, please contact your account manager. We'll go to the details at the end of the call. So the agenda for today, well, it's all about why you might want to move to FlowForma's cloud offering in Office 365. And we'll be talking about some of the reasons you might want to do that, and also the additional cloud enterprise features that will be available to you once you do that migration. My colleague Ross will be joining me, and he'll be talking to you about how you might migrate FlowForma's existing content from your on-premise environment to the cloud environment. So talking about migrating forms and flows, and also any SharePoint customizations that you may have. And then we'll have some time at the end, as I mentioned, for questions and answers. So to start off with, the person speaking right now is Paul Stone. I may have talked to many of you before. And I'm a product evangelist at FlowForma, so I talk about new features and where the product is going to next and so on. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Ross Cullen. Now, Ross is working in our customer success department, and you may well know him as well. So, Ross, I don't know if you'd like to say hello or no, that's fine. I think Ross is going to join us a little bit later on. And so we'll move straight on to the first point in the agenda. So why move to FlowForma from your existing on-premise environment to Office 365? Well, here's the main reasons that you might want to do that. What I'm not going to talk about is the general reason as to why you might want to move to the cloud. There's obvious reasons, and there's lots of them as to why the cloud is a more attractive infrastructure than using an on-premise infrastructure. But one of the great things about moving FlowForma from on-premise is that you're always going to be up to date. We update FlowForma in the cloud every month in our monthly release cycle, which covers bug fixes and also some minor feature updates. And then we have quarterly releases that include major feature updates. So as we're releasing new functionality in the system, it'll be immediately available to you. And it also ensures that you have regular bug fix releases as well. So at the moment in an on-premise environment, that involves us creating and sending you an installer, and then you have to take the system down briefly and install the software, etc. You avoid all of that hassle when you move to the cloud. You also avoid the hassle of mobile connectivity. We have mobile apps, but they can be tricky to configure in an on-premise environment, but it's really straightforward when you're in Office 365. You're always going to avail of the latest product features. So as we add in new features to the base product, those features are immediately available and deployed in your organization. And also by moving to the cloud, our enterprise features become an option. Our enterprise features have all been developed with the cloud in mind, and many of them are only available from the cloud environment. So these become an option, and I'm going to go through them briefly later on, but there's really some very attractive features that make FlowForma a lot more usable, especially in larger environments, so you may find them of great interest. The other advantage is that you can connect to lots of cloud services. There are a lot of cloud applications out there that provide very good additional services that FlowForma can integrate with, and this becomes an option when you move FlowForma onto the cloud. And by the way, you can also still connect to your on-prem applications. A lot of people avoid the cloud because they're concerned that their existing on-prem applications will become detached and they will no longer be able to communicate with them. In fact, that's not always true. Most of the time now you can access those on-prem applications via an appropriate gateway. I'll talk a little bit about that later on when I talk about our feature. Okay, so now quickly a brief run through of our enterprise features. These are features they are available at an additional cost, but they provide a lot of benefit to you and are available when you move to the cloud. They've all been built with the cloud infrastructure in mind. First of all, we have Collaborate. Now, Collaborate is all about portals and dashboards. Essentially, they're entry points into the FlowForma system, and it allows you to group processes and so on based on the type of process and business area that they relate to. So it's a very useful feature. A lot of people like Collaborate, and it just provides a very friendly kind of entry point into FlowForma. The next thing is the Governance Hub. The Governance Hub allows you to create as many environments as you like within your Office 365 environment, so that you can create environments for sandboxes. For example, sandboxes are where business users can go in and experiment and create flows without impacting the production environments. So the production environments is where it all happens with the business end users, and these are kept safe and away from the sandbox environments where people are using the system more for experimentation and innovation. And the Governance Hub lets you manage all that. So regardless of how many sandboxes and production environments you create in your tenant, the Governance Hub lets you see a holistic view of the whole lot and allows you to transfer processes between the environments as well as they evolve. Simplify is all about storing data outside of SharePoint. As you know, FlowForma uses SharePoint as a data repository, but Simplify lets you take some of that data and store it outside very easily, in fact, in SQL Server. Connect lets you integrate with over 200 systems. And then Academy is all about providing online training. The great advantage of online training is it's there whenever you need it. So you don't have to schedule a training course. You can participate in that online training as and when you have time. Now, quickly, what I'm going to do is a demonstration. I'm going to keep it very short because I know that a lot of you on the call will have seen this before. So I'm just going to quickly show you what some of these enterprise features look like as a little bit of a reminder and to whet your appetite for some of the flashier features of FlowForma. So let me escape out of this presentation first and jump into our browser. Okay, so first up is Collaborate. Collaborate's all about creating those entry points, the dashboards. And this is a typical dashboard here. It's one for talent management. And as you can see, we have some links on top that are used to create new processes in the area of talent management. So for example, mentoring requests, performance reviews, and so on. And down here, then we have a series of work lists. So these are my work lists, the forms that are relevant to me right now. And I can click on these forms to go in and open up the form and carry out the step that's currently assigned to me. Down below, then, I see a more holistic view of all the activity in talent management at the moment. So here I can see, for example, employees being onboarded and at the various statuses and so on. And you can create as many of those dashboards as you like. So this is another dashboard for customer onboarding. And as you can see, it looks very different in terms of its content. I've also included some different types of reports and so on in here. But again, it's all a collection of information that's relevant to its particular business area. And you can create as many of these as you like, either for business areas or maybe for individuals, for people in different roles and so on. So they all see their own personalized view of the FlowForma system in your tenant. The next thing is governance. So governance lets you manage all the environments in your system. So you can actually have business users requesting new environments. I want the sandbox to play in, for example, and that request will go through to IT. IT then press a button, the sandbox is created. And basically IT can act as gatekeepers on the system so that they can understand and grant permissions, if you like, on different FlowForma environments throughout your organization. And you can also use the system to migrate processes and related data across from one environment to another. So people can request process promotions from their sandbox, let's say, into the production environment. You can also see, and you may not have seen this before actually, we have a licensing hub that shows you all the active environments and all the active users in your system. So really the governance hub allows you to manage the deployment of FlowForma across your entire tenant and manage your sandbox, your test, and your production environments. The next thing is to talk about is simplify. So simplify is all about allowing you to create entities that you can store all that form information in these entities which actually reside on a SQL database. And you can manage all that without the need to do any coding. So you don't need to create tables. The system does that automatically for you. You don't need to create stored procedures to pass data to your SQL database. That's all automatically handled in the background. All you need to do is to create your form, specify the fields here that the entity should contain, and then to have simple business rules and lookups and so on that lets you push and pull information out of those entities. And you can use that across different forms and different processes within your system, so that many different processes within the system can all access the same detail for example, for employees or clients or whatever. The next thing on the list then is to talk about Connect, and our Connect system allows you to push and pull information via a system called Logic Apps. Now, Logic Apps is a service provided by Microsoft that integrates with over 200 applications, and you can use Logic Apps to push and pull information out of between FlowForma and those external systems. Now, the external systems can include things as simple as email, for example. You can use Logic Apps to send an email, but it can also include things, more complex things such as Microsoft Dynamics or let's say SAP. So you can really do quite complex integrations with external systems using Logic Apps. Now, as I said, I've done a demonstration of all of these features before. I'm not going to go into any detail here, but there's an example of a Logic App where I'm creating a message in Slack, as it happens, just posting a message to a sales forecast. And this information here, you see customer name and customer notification, that's information that's pulled into the message from the FlowForma form. It's really quick and easy. And this suite of the suite of features, excuse me, are available as part of our Enterprise Plus package, which you can purchase as an option. And it really extends the functionality available in FlowForma. So let me just jump back now to our presentation. Oops, excuse me. The last point on the presentation, by the way, was for my Academy there, but rather than give you a demonstration, I know Ross is going to talk to you a little bit about that shortly. So I'll let Ross take over now and join the call and show you his slides.
Thank you, Paul. It was a very interesting presentation. What I'm going to be talking to you about is, if you are interested in moving to Office 365, what are the next steps? What are the different things that you'll need to be conscious of and consider, and how you might actually go about doing the migration, what's involved in that. So I've broken this down into three main categories. So there's a flow migration. This is moving your processes from your on-premise environment into your Office 365 environment. After that, we can migrate your forms. So the existing forms that you've created in your on-premise, we can migrate them across as well. And then I have SharePoint customizations, and this is kind of a catch-all for anything else that's happening in your on-premise environment. So that could be simple things like your navigational menus to the views that you've created on your lists. We would need to duplicate all of that work as well. So what you would need to consider is what of those are relevant for you to migrate. In some cases, you might just want to take your processes and you don't need to keep your forms. You might want to keep your forms, or you may be generating documents at the end of your forms and you just need to keep a copy of those documents and you don't need the actual FlowForma form. Another option is keeping your on-premise environment in read-only mode. So that would allow you to go back in and open up and have full access to all of your forms, but you can't make any additional changes. You can't create any new forms. But there are some implications in this, and the main one is that you'll need a license. So an additional license will need to be purchased so you can still use FlowForma in that environment. Other implications would be around SharePoint support. So we know some clients are still using SharePoint 2010, and that isn't supported by Microsoft anymore. So it's not an ideal situation to be in. And any other patches or fixes that would need to go into that environment would still be a factor. So once you've decided what it is you're going to be migrating, if we were to start with migrating your flows, this is quite simple. If you've ever done, let's say, a UAT to production migration, it's quite similar. So we can export your flows as an XML file, and then we can use the import feature to import them back into your Office 365 environment. Doing that is quite handy because it will include any of the document templates or email templates that are being used, so you won't have to recreate all of those. You will need to bring over any lists that are being used. So if you're writing information out to a SharePoint list or pulling information from a list into your form, you would still need to have access to those lists. But this is also made quite simple in SharePoint because you can export those lists as a list template and it will include all of the content. And then you can just pick up from where you left off. Another thing to consider is if you're integrating with any third-party apps or with SQL databases and things like that. So if you're going from on-premise Office 365, how are you going to make those available? You could use the logic apps as Paul was describing, or are you going to put a database into Azure, or what options are you going to take there? For migrating the flows, it is something that you can do yourself if you have the knowledge and you have the time and you want to take care of that. You don't need to get FlowForma to do that for you. So if you have experience putting a flow from UAT into production, you can take the same sort of approach going from on-premise into Office 365. And next we have the migrating forms. So for this, an additional tool was developed by our R&D team, which will do the form migration for you. And essentially how this works is that you map the forms in your on-premise environment to the flow that you have in your Office 365 environment. And what the tool will do is it will run through each of your forms, take the answers that were given in those questions, create a new form in your Office 365 environment, and place those values in there. So it's essentially running through it one by one and recreating the form for you. There are some issues with this because forms tend to go through different phases where you're adding things, you're removing questions, and they go through a lot of changes. So the very early versions of your forms mightn't match what you have currently. So there could be questions that are missing. You could have added in another step that wasn't contained in the early versions. So there will be some inconsistencies in those new forms. So that is something to think about. And we will need a developer to monitor this. So unlike migrating your flows where you can do that all by yourself, a developer will need to be involved in migrating the forms just to take care of any issues that do pop up. And it can take a little bit of time depending on how much data is there. So we know clients can have 100 forms or they could have 500,000 forms. So the amount of data that you need to migrate will decide and dictate how long it's going to actually take to move that data, as well as if you are migrating the documents, it will take time to move all of those as well. Next, we have the SharePoint customizations. So as I was saying, this can include anything else that you're doing in your Office or your on-premise environment. So if you've made some customizations to the home page, if you have views set up on your forms list, if you have additional web parts that are displaying other information, you will need to take some time to redo that work in your Office 365 environment. There'll also be some time to take into account for getting your user group set up and adding all of the permissions. Outside of that, there could be some custom development that has been done for you. So if that's any custom work or custom rules that have been made for you, we would just need to be aware of that so that we can make sure that it can be done in Office 365 as well. So in most cases, it is straightforward enough to just recreate it or copy it across, but there may be a particular custom bit of work that might have to be reevaluated. So I won't be able to run through a demonstration of a migration at the moment, but I am working on a training course for the FlowForma Academy. So the Academy is where we have, I think at the moment, about 13 courses, and they go through everything from beginners getting introduced to FlowForma, what is the flow designer, how do you add a question, all the way up to designing reports. And I'm going to be adding a new course at the end of this quarter where I'll take you through the step-by-step instructions on how to actually take out your flows give you an insight into how the form migration tool works, and it will give you quite a good bit of understanding if you were to take on some of this work yourself, what it's actually going to involve. And that's all I have for now.
Thanks, Ross. So just to say that we'll cover off some questions and answers. I can see one question coming in where you're asking if those dashboards that I showed would incorporate the data in your on-premise environment. So that's important to say, I guess, that once you migrate over to Office 365, FlowForma exists in that Office 365 environment, and all those dashboards and the environments that you saw in the governance app, for example, yeah, they're all looking at that Office 365 tenancy. So the old environment, if you like, isn't visible from the enterprise features point of view. But, you know, whether that's going to be relevant or not, if you're migrating your forms, all that data will be in your Office 365 environment. So you actually have it there to do your reporting off and to manage those flows in your Office 365. So whether, to be honest, you need that old environment, that's a big question. I think that's something that when you plan your migration, you can decide whether you actually need to keep that old environment there at all. Okay, and I think that's all the questions we have for today. Oh, sorry, there's I think one more coming in. Let me just check. Oh, Ross, hey, Ross, you might
Looks
want
like
to
it's
ask
for me.
that.
So we have a question about a client who's on version 3. So they've stayed all the way back on version 3, and they're just wondering, is that going to be the same? There is a little bit more work involved in version 3 because it's based off a different architecture, and we can't import the flows directly from version 3 into the current version. So if you're on version 4 and after, then it's fine, but in version 3 there's a little bit more work involved in getting your flows across. But if you are in that situation, I would say just to reach out to us. We can do a little bit more investigation into how long that will take and what would be involved in actually getting that up and running.
Hi, I still can see that there's another question coming in there that the dashboards that I was showing earlier on are using modern pages. So I know that many of our clients, on-premise clients, are implemented in older versions of SharePoint and are running on classic pages, so classic internet pages and so on. Yeah, absolutely. When you move to SharePoint Online, you can access FlowForma via modern pages, and those dashboards that I showed you were indeed all, and the governance app and so on, were all on modern pages. So the way it works, just for complete clarification, is that the FlowForma landing page is inside the FlowForma app and still has that classic look, although we're working on that. We're hoping to change it soon. But any pages you create outside that, so for example, those dashboard pages are all created outside the app, and they're using SharePoint web parts, modern SharePoint web parts that are configured using a no-code interface. And basically all those web parts are existing on modern pages. So totally you're giving FlowForma a makeover by giving it a new landing page, a new access point. And then FlowForma, of course, the forms themselves open up inside the browser. They're a little bit detached from SharePoint, and they stay exactly the same as they were before. Oh, actually, can I just clarify a little bit? I'm just thinking, I'm remembering that some of the people on the call will be on very old versions of FlowForma. And in fact, of course, you're getting the very modern look and feel of the new forms. And the new forms, by the way, for some of you, it'll be relevant. You can customize those new forms with branding and so on. So you can make your forms look a whole lot better with the new version of FlowForma. Because we've built in the forms designer, which allows you to change the layout of the forms and apply branding and colors and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot more features in the latest version of FlowForma that some of you will be familiar with. Certainly anybody on version 3 it'll be quite a revelation moving on to the latest version of FlowForma. It's so much easier to use and so much more responsive to the end user as well.
I have one other question here, and it's someone mentioning that they've heard about this form migration tool before, but they've never actually seen it. And the reason for that is because the form migration work will be done by a developer. It's not something that we can hand over to you for you to look after yourself. And the reason for this is when you export the flow, you're exporting the current version, and there's only that one version of the flow. When it comes to your forms, it's possible that every single form that you have will be based on a different version of the flow. So when we're trying to do the migration, there could be some hiccups in which we would need a developer to step in and kind of control that. So that's why you probably haven't seen the form migration tool. It's because it's not something we intend to give to the client to do the work themselves on. But in terms of migrating the flows, that is something that you can look after yourself. And how the effort is calculated in that work is pretty much basically based on how much information there is to migrate. As I was saying, you could have 10 flows and you're only interested in migrating the forms from one of those flows. And the amount of forms, you could have 100, or you could have 1,000, or you could have 10,000. And what's in those forms? Are you generating a ton of documents? Is it just a simple questionnaire? It's really based on an individual case-by-case situation in how much effort is actually going to be involved in the form migration. I think we'll give a minute if anyone has any other questions. Let's say ask them now. I think that's all we're going to get. Okay.
Okay, thanks everybody for joining the call today. Just stay in touch. You can either contact Ross or myself, or should you want any further detail, please contact your territory manager, that's Shea O'Connor and Timmy Oakey. Details on the screen right now. We'll leave those on the screen for a few minutes. And yeah, and wish you all the best with your FlowForma migrations. Really, the latest version of the product is so much easier to use than the old version 3 and even previous versions, version 4, 5, and so on. We constantly improve it every quarter, and the user interface on the latest version is very pleasant to use. So it also looks a whole lot better on those modern pages. So look forward to hearing from you in the future, and thanks all for attending today. Thank you.